Nor can I count the stars that float in space. But God can do what seems impossible. God can truth eternity. My mind can never comprehend it, but God in heaven cares for me. I don't know how the Lord can save a sinner, or how his grace can cleanse and set him free. I can't explain the mystery of Calvary, but think that Jesus died for even me. But God can do what seems impossible. God controls eternity. My mind can never comprehend it, but God in heaven cares for me. I don't know all the meaning of forever, or just how long it's been since time began. I can't explain how Christ, who is eternal, could come to earth and die for sinful man. But God can do what seems impossible. God controls eternity. My mind can never comprehend it, but God in heaven cares for me. But God in heaven cares for me.
Amen. We serve a God that can do the impossible. What a wonderful God we serve. And we get a glimpse of that as we see the story of Joseph. Humanly speaking, there's a lot of bad things that happen here, but yet, as we will see even today, God uses even the bad for his good, for his glory. This morning, I want to preach a message entitled, God Did Send Me, as we get back into our story on the life of Joseph. In February of 2015, a girl by the name of Zephany in South Africa was reunited with her family after 17 plus years. She was born in April of 1997 and stolen out of her mother's arms while sleeping 3 days after being born in the hospital. Many thought her to be dead, but family never gave up. Even held birthday parties every year to make sure that they celebrated this life. It turns out that Zephany grew up just a few miles away with a different family, but was never detected as the missing girl. Zephany's parents went on to have 3 more children, including another girl named Cassidy. Fast forward 17 years, Zephany and Cassidy ended up at the same school. Cassidy was told that there was a girl at the school that looks just like you. At that point, they didn't know. The aunt of the girls was made aware of the situation and then made the dad of the girls aware. One day, these sisters, who just so happened to have established a friendship, were eating together at a McDonald's. Their dad, who was in the midst of investigating and finding out what was going in, walked in and saw the 2 girls and instantly knew that must be our long-lost daughter. But he didn't say anything at that point. In time, DNA test eventually confirmed that it was true. And after 17 years, this teenager was reunited with her mother. The lady that stole her was charged with kidnapping as well. Now, that's a story that truly happened in Africa not that long ago. And stories like that are out there. In this case, there was a family that was hoping to find their daughter. In Genesis 45, we have a story of brothers that hoped their brother would never come home. They did not want to see Joseph come home. And Jacob believed his son was dead only to find out some startling news. We're going to pick up here in chapter 45, and we left off here, but we start with this morning, that Joseph reveals himself to his brothers. And okay, there we go, we got it. Joseph reveals himself to his brothers. Verse number 1. Then Joseph could not refrain himself before all them that stood by him, and he cried, "Cause every man to go out from me." And there stood no man with him, while Joseph made himself known unto his brethren. And he wept aloud, and the Egyptians in the house of Pharaoh heard. And Joseph said unto his brethren, "I am Joseph. Doth my father yet live?" And his brethren could not answer him, for they were troubled at his presence. Now, we left off here, and we even read those verses 2 weeks ago. I realize that, but I reread them today, and that's going to get us back into the story. After all of this time, all of what has gone on, Joseph now sends everybody out, and he reveals himself to his brothers. Last time we looked at the big test, and they had passed the test. Judah, if you recall, had put his head on the line for Benjamin, demonstrating that the brothers had changed from the day that they sold Joseph into slavery. Joseph was overcome emotionally and sends everyone out of the room, and once alone, he reveals himself, just as we read here in these verses. Joseph weeps aloud. The brothers are in shock. They threw this 17-year-old back at the time in a pit. They pulled him out of the pit and they sold him. They dipped the blood of his coat in blood. They lied about what had happened to Dad, and now they are face to face with this man, their brother. Joseph is about 39 years old now, and he is also the second in command in all of Egypt. Last week, the brothers went through the stressful situation of Benjamin finding the silver cup in his sack, or they found it in Benjamin's sack when they went through and opened it up. Now they are confronted with the truth of a lie that they have been telling for all those years. I can just imagine the tension in the room at this point. Now, we know the 10 brothers knew the truth. They knew the truth all along. They knew that they had sold Joseph. They didn't know Joseph was standing in front of them till just now, but they knew the truth of all that had transpired. I do have to wonder if Benjamin even really knew. And my guess would be not. My guess is Benjamin did not understand all of this. So Benjamin, who was probably around 4 years old when Joseph was sold, doesn't really remember his brother, now understands, this is my brother, the other son of his mother. By the way, his mother that he never met because she died in childbirth when Benjamin was born. And now he learns in the presence of all his brothers that this is Joseph, and my brothers have deceived Dad for all these years. I am guessing that Benjamin understood this fully for the first time right here at this moment. To be honest, I feel bad for Benjamin. His brother gone, his mom dead, his father heartbroken over the loss of his brother. And in verse 3, Joseph asked a question. And this is interesting to me because in chapter 43, he asked the very same question. I think we'll have it up there for you. Notice chapter 43, verse number 27. It says this, "And he asked them of their welfare and said, 'Is your father well? The old man of whom ye spake, is he yet alive?'" Do you notice the difference in the question? Both are asking about the welfare of Jacob, but in Genesis 43, it was your father. But if you noticed here in Genesis 45, verse number 3, he asked the question, "Is my father?" Joseph, by the way, doesn't get an answer right now because his brothers are so troubled. They were dismayed and filled with alarm at what they had heard. They can't even speak. But you see the difference now that they know, "I'm your brother." He asked that question, "Is my father yet alive?" The brothers knew they were guilty. Do you remember this? Let me give you some other verses back from Genesis chapter 42, beginning verse 21. "And they said one to another, 'We are verily guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the anguish of his soul when he besought us, and we would not hear. Therefore is this distress come upon us.'" This was back in chapter 42, before he had been revealed, and they were going through everything there. Verse 22, "And Reuben answered them, saying, 'Spake I not unto you, saying, Do not sin against this child? And ye would not hear. Therefore, behold, also his blood is required.'" And then verse 23, "And they knew not that Joseph understood them, for he spake unto them by an interpreter." So through all this time, Joseph has spoke with an interpreter. He has not revealed himself. Now he has revealed himself. They are feeling very guilty at this moment. They knew they were in the wrong. And now, as they stand before Joseph, their fear is, what is Joseph going to do to us now? And frankly, that was a legitimate fear for them. Because if Joseph treated his brothers like they treated him, they were in serious trouble. And humanly speaking, we might say, well, the next point could be Joseph gets even, or Joseph gets revenge. But notice our next point is this: Joseph comforts his brothers. Joseph comforts his brothers. Not what we would expect. The next scene we see, and Pastor Matt led us in reading this portion, was Joseph explaining to his brothers how God had worked this all out so well. I mean, you could hardly blame Joseph if he were to speak to them sternly and ask them, "How could you do this? Explain yourselves." And then eventually come out with an "I forgive you." But Joseph has a whole different perspective on all of this. They're immediately fearful because they did wrong. They expect Joseph will want revenge. But Joseph has a much bigger perspective on it all. Joseph doesn't see their actions as they see them. Joseph now understands that God sent him to Egypt for a very specific reason. And while Joseph could maybe question, why didn't God do it in a more pleasant way? Joseph realizes that the way God chose to get him to Egypt was through his brothers, even through the sin of the 10 brothers. Now, I have to admit, I don't understand it all. But God used Jacob's favoritism. God used the brothers' hatred. God used Joseph's dreams. God even used the timing of the Ishmaelite traders. God used the fact that Reuben stepped away for a short period of time there because he wanted to put an end to it. God used all of that while the brothers made the sale in order to accomplish his purpose, and by that I mean God's purpose. And if you and I were to sit down and to discuss this and come up with our plan, my guess is, now we know this story, so we know how it all turns out, but none of us would plan it this way. I am sure you have heard someone say, I don't see how God could ever work through this. I don't see how God could ever get glory in this. When Joseph was sitting in that prison cell, he could have said that. When he was facing his brothers, he could have tried to get even, but instead, Joseph is using his misfortune to now comfort his brothers. He saw the bigger picture. You have to understand that God sees a much bigger picture than we see. I am not saying that any of those sins were right. I'm not justifying any of the sins that were committed there. They were wrong. They should not have happened. They should not have done what they did. But we see a small portion of life. We are finite and we only can see so much, but yet God sees the entire picture. He sees all the different moving pieces. And they don't make sense to us, but it does to God. And Joseph is understanding it. Therefore, Joseph concludes, God did send me. And that's what I've entitled the message for today. As a matter of fact, he tells them not to be angry with yourselves, not to be grieved. He tells them about the famine as well. He says, listen, we're in famine. We're now 2 years into the famine, and we have 5 more years to go. And with that in mind, understand God sent me from there to here. God put me in the exact place. He revealed the dreams to me, and now I am here to preserve the life of you. I am here to preserve the life of Israel, the nation of Israel. May I say, God always takes care of his people, and he always took care of the nation of Israel. And I didn't know what we would read in the news yesterday when this was all together, but I believe God will still take care of the nation of Israel. Thus, God has sent me to preserve you. They were afraid he would want to end their lives, but Joseph explains he is not there to end their lives. He is there to save their lives. God did send me. He raised me up to this position. He made me counselor to Pharaoh. He made me a ruler in the house of Pharaoh. And it is in this position that he was able to claim what he claimed in verse number 8 there. And that's where he says, it was not you that sent me hither, but God. So Joseph comforts his brothers. But notice next, Joseph sends his brothers to get Dad. Having assured his brothers he was not angry, having explained to them how God had put him in this place, he now tells them, you are going to go back and get Dad. And it may have already crossed the minds of those 10 brothers. But no doubt when Joseph says, you go home and get Dad and bring him to me, the full weight, the full force of that had to hit those 10 brothers. We have to tell Dad. After all these years, 22 of them approximately, they will be heading home to tell Dad that this Lord, or this man that they had referred to him, this ruler who had treated them roughly, it turns out that that's Joseph, their brother who was dead. After 22 years of living a lie, they would have to come clean. That's a long time. Joseph asked his brothers to send a message to Dad to explain that he is Lord in Egypt and wants to invite them to come and live here. And that message would need quite an explanation, right? I can only imagine that as those brothers would go home, they would have quite the discussion. You tell him, right? No, you tell him. No, I'm not going to tell him. How are we going to explain this all? But Joseph says to the brothers, I am going to take care of you. I am going to take care of your families. Due to what God has done in all this, you're going to be preserved. You see, here it is. This is the reason that God sent Joseph to Egypt. This famine was severe. Jacob or Israel would have been impacted by the famine in a great way. Understanding is that there would have been loss of life, but Joseph was sent to Egypt so that he could preserve their lives, and in so doing, preserve God's people, the nation of Israel. Remember, God told Abraham, I will make of you a great nation. If they were wiped out in this famine, it would have been a different story. But God keeps his promises. Notice now verse 12 and following. And behold, your eyes see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin, that it is in my mouth that speaketh unto you. And ye shall tell my father of all my glory in Egypt, and of all that ye have seen. Ye shall haste and bring down my father hither. And he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck and wept. And Benjamin wept upon his neck. Moreover, he kissed all his brethren and wept upon them. And after that, his brethren talked with him. Your eyes and Benjamin's eyes. Why that? His brothers could be suspect, right? They have to explain they told a lie all those years ago. Are they now really telling the truth? But Benjamin wouldn't be suspect, though. Benjamin could testify this really is Joseph. He wasn't part of all that had happened before. So you're going to go home and you're going to explain to Dad how the Lord is using me here. You're going to tell him what you have seen. And then Joseph breaks down at this point with a flood of emotion. He kisses, he weeps upon their necks. It's an emotional time. Benjamin, his true brother, first, he weeps on his neck, and then on all of them. You see, Joseph here demonstrates true forgiveness and true love to his brethren. There is a spiritual maturity to Joseph to be able to handle it this way. So many could get bitter, angry, revengeful, and blame others for why all this happened. In today's world, we would expect the world to say Joseph is going to have to sit on a couch for a very long time and dig into the recesses of his past and told it's not his fault that he couldn't forgive. But not Joseph. Joseph understood what God was doing, and Joseph granted biblical forgiveness to his brothers. Let's continue the story here. Pharaoh hears the news. And Pharaoh's been a player in this story. He didn't realize how significant his role was or how he was going to have an impact on the nation of Israel in this way. But notice verse 16 through 20. And the fame thereof was heard in Pharaoh's house, saying, Joseph's brethren are come. And it pleased Pharaoh well, and his servants. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, Say unto thy brethren, This do ye, lade your beast, and go, get you unto the land of Canaan, and take your father and your households, and come unto me, and I will give you the good of the land of Egypt, and ye shall eat the fat of the land. Now thou art commanded, this do ye. Take you wagons out of the land of Egypt for your little ones and for your wives, and bring your father, and come. And also regard not your stuff, for the good of all the land of Egypt is yours. There's been quite a commotion in Joseph's house. It has not gone unnoticed either. It reaches to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh shows great kindness to Joseph's family. And that might beg the question, well, why would he show this kindness to his family? And we're not given a clear answer here. We're not told why, but the most obvious thought is that Joseph was the savior of the land of Egypt, right? He's the one that brought all about so that they could eat right now. Pharaoh's greatness and wealth has been and will be greatly advanced because of Joseph's success. By the way, that's the nature of success, is that it impacts others. There's no need to be jealous of others' success. It may help your success as well. So Pharaoh has an opportunity now to do something incredibly nice for Joseph, and he offers to Joseph's family some of the best of the land of Egypt. And I love this. He commands Joseph to say this. He sends them down with wagons, taking supplies, carry the women, carry the children, and then come back. Bring your dad back. Don't even worry about your stuff. If you can't bring it, just leave it. You'll be supplied here with all you need. Verse 21, and the children of Israel did so, and Joseph gave them wagons according to the commandment of Pharaoh, and gave them provision for the way. To all of them he gave each man changes of raiment, but to Benjamin he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of raiment. And to his father he sent after this manner 10 asses laden with the good things of Egypt, and 10 she-asses laden with corn and bread and meat for his father by the way. Verse 24, so he sent his brethren away, and they departed, and he said unto them, See that ye not fall not out by the way. He loads them up with clothing, money, extras for Benjamin, 10 donkeys with good things from Egypt, 10 donkeys with food and provision. They had an abundance there in Egypt. Grain was like the sand of the sea. They had so much. God provided abundantly. We see God's provision for his people. Not only enough for the people in Egypt, but also enough for the nations around, including the nation of Israel. And he did so through Joseph. And by the way, I like the very last phrase of verse 24, see that ye fall not out by the way. Joseph says to his brethren, don't quarrel. No quarreling. And you can understand why they might quarrel, right? You can understand that it could be some serious, intense discussion on the way, but Joseph says, forget it. Stop it. Don't even quarrel about it. Just go home and do what I've asked you to do. And then notice, finally for today, Jacob hears the news. Jacob hears the news. 20 plus years ago, Jacob heard news about Joseph that your son is dead. I imagine he talked about Joseph through the years. I imagine there were some very awkward discussions at that home through the years. But verse number 25 and following, and they went up out of Egypt and came into the land of Canaan unto Jacob their father. and told him, saying, Joseph is yet alive, and he is governor over all the land of Egypt. And Jacob's heart fainted, for he believed them not. And they told him all the words of Joseph, which he had said unto them. And when he saw the wagons which Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of Jacob their father revived. And Israel said, It is enough. Joseph, my son, is yet alive. I will go and see him before I die. The brothers go home, and it's time to own up to the lie. It's time to tell the truth. This wasn't an insignificant conversation. This was a big conversation. We're told a very small snapshot of what happened. I imagine a lot more got explained in this conversation. Dad, remember that day 22 years ago? We brought that garment, that coat of many colors with blood on it? How could I ever forget? Maybe Jacob even kept the coat. I don't know. Dad, we didn't tell the truth. And after 22 years of living and believing a lie, Jacob is given the truth. So startling for him, he couldn't even believe it at first. His heart fainted. But in time, he comes to understand it's true. My sons have deceived me all these years. Joseph is still alive. And then we don't have this explained here, but I imagine the brothers also began, and maybe Benjamin was part in this, to say, yeah, but Dad, you have to understand Joseph's mentality in all of this. Joseph wasn't even mad at us. Joseph wept upon us and kissed us, and he sent all these things with us. And maybe Jacob's trying to figure this all out. And you see, Dad, what Joseph told us is that, you did it for, you had your plan, but God sent me here. It was God that did this. God has sent me here because, Dad, there's going to be 5 more years of famine. But God put Joseph in the right place, and he's got tons of grain there. He has plenty of food available to be able to preserve life. And Dad, Joseph wants you to come back. We have to take you back. Last time we told you we had to take Benjamin. This time we have to take you. We have to take everybody now and head back to the land because God is going to preserve us there in that land. And we come to this far in the story. We are winding down the story now a little bit. We still have some more to finish, and we will have a couple weeks off as I'll be away traveling to the mission field the next couple of Sundays. Next time we're together, though, we will see Jacob reunite with his son. Now, as I conclude this today, several weeks ago, when we saw the brothers' guilt for what they had done, I encouraged you that if you had something in your past that you needed to deal with, that you would do so. And I would still encourage you that way. If you have something you know you need to deal with, that you would deal with that. But this time I want to look at the story from the other side. I want to look at it from the perspective of Joseph here. I left this off purposely last time. But this week, let's consider it from Joseph's perspective. Could it be that there is somebody that you need to grant forgiveness to, but you're holding on to it? Could it be that you, unlike Joseph, are not willing to release that wrong? Could it be that you have 10 brothers? Not literally, figuratively in this sense now, okay? You have those 10 brothers that have harmed you. You have someone that has done something harmful to you, and you are holding on to that, and you are not willing to forgive like Joseph did. You see, when it came to Joseph, Joseph said, you don't have to be afraid. You don't have to be upset. You don't have to be scared. You see, I think even though there Joseph communicated it to them, Joseph had released them of this wrong long ago. So when faced with the decision, it wasn't really even a decision at that point for Joseph. It was merely communication. Joseph had already come to terms with the fact that God had sent him here. And I am here for a purpose. Now, in Joseph's case, it was a very obvious purpose, right? It was pretty clear. In our case, we may not see it that clearly. It may not be that clear to us why the Lord allowed that thing to go on in our past. But I want to encourage you today, perhaps there is somebody that you are holding on to unforgiveness toward, and you're unwilling to release that wrong. See, I believe forgiveness is a choice, a willful choice to release a wrong. But I don't feel like it. We don't generally feel like it. And your feelings don't have anything to do with it, actually. Yes, you may be hurt, and you may have hurt feelings, I get that. But we are commanded to forgive others on the basis that Christ has forgiven us. And therefore, we have to make a choice to say, I will release that wrong, and I will not hold this against you any longer. And I don't know what might be in your heart today. I don't know if the Holy Spirit might be putting his finger on something and saying, yeah, that's you right there. And if that's the case, could I encourage you that you would cry out and help and ask God for help, ask for his grace, that you would be able to release that wrong and forgive that person from the sin that maybe they have committed against you, from the wrong they have done to you. Would you be willing to grant forgiveness to that individual or those people and give freedom to yourself? You see, the one that's enslaved is the one that holds on to the unforgiveness. But when you forgive, you offer them forgiveness, but you also grant freedom to your soul from the anger and bitterness that you are holding in your heart. Holding onto forgiveness hurts you and puts you in bondage. So if that's you today, like Joseph, would you be willing to say, I'm going to release the wrong? On the basis that Jesus Christ died on the cross to offer the forgiveness of my sins, I am going to forgive that person. Maybe it's a really complicated situation and you want to talk to somebody about that, and myself or Pastor Matt would be happy to talk you through that if you're not sure what exactly that looks like. But I'd encourage you today to grant freedom to yourself by forgiving that other person and taking care of that. So like Joseph, you can see God at work, even despite the wrongs that are there. Shall we pray?